Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited, and we are working once again on our twin charge Magnum project. Now in our last episode you saw that we got the new CNC plasma tool all up and running. We did a test cut with that. We're going to continue on with actually building our throttle body adapter. That's what we're going to try to get done in this episode. Now getting this adapter completed is important because once we have our throttle body in place, that allows us to remove our bumper fascia here, get our intercooler mounted, and start running all of our intercooler lines on this engine. And that is the last of the major fab work that needs to be done on this vehicle. So once we can actually accomplish all of that, a lot of the other stuff is just buttoning it up. So we're actually moving a lot closer and closer to actually firing this thing up. I know it's kind of taking a little bit of time, and I know you guys want to hear it as bad as I do, but the only way to do that is to put in the work necessary to get this stuff done. Now, one of the interesting things about this adapter that we're making is that it has to bend in two different directions at once, because as it comes out the outlet here, we need to turn it to move towards the front of the car, but we also need it to bend down to angle down to where the actual intercooler pipe is going to come up from to make a nice smooth transition. Now our CNC plasma is of course a two-dimensional machine, which means you can only make one bend on the drawing itself. So we'll have to form the other bend using the shop press, but you'll see all that a little bit later on. So I think the first thing we need to do is go ahead and cut out our flanges, both for the supercharger and for the throttle body. And after that, we can actually figure out what our angles need to be so we can start drawing up our new pieces in CAD. Now I did modify the design for my flanges just a little bit from the last time you saw them. So what I want to do is I want to cut out another test piece for each of those flanges and make sure everything fits perfectly before I transition over to That went so much better than I anticipated it going. That's awesome. The holes themselves do have a fair bit of taper to them, so I'll have to clean those up with a drill bit, but that's okay. These are more just for locating anyway. I always wanted to clean up those holes with a drill bit to make them actually nice and smooth and round. Not a problem there, but the rest of this cut looks like it went really well. I don't know if there's some settings I need to change here to clean it up even better, but for right now, that actually looks pretty darn good. I'm very happy with this for a first cut. Let's get this thing cleaned up. Look at this, just a couple of minutes of quick cleanup just to clean up the edges here a little bit and then hit it with some Scotch-Brite, and I have a perfectly good flange ready to go for our adapter. This is amazing, and it's actually a little bit more intuitive than I expected it to be. It's not nearly as difficult to get everything set up. I think after you do your first couple of cuts, you kind of understand what it's asking of you, what it wants to see, and then it makes it a little bit easier to move forward from there. So, I mean, honestly, this is my very first attempt here, and it's really coming out exactly like I wanted it to. So definitely not doing the most complicated things with this machine. I mean, obviously this is a fairly straightforward flange to be cutting out, but the fact that I could do this in just a couple of minutes and get it all cleaned up like this, if I were to make this exact same flange by hand, I think I'd probably be looking at maybe an hour, hour and a half, maybe more actually to get it, and it wouldn't be this nice and finished. So this machine is already working out. And obviously the important bit, does it actually fit? Like a glove. Love it. All right, now it's time to go ahead and cut out the flange for our throttle body here. I already have it drawn up. Notice that in my test piece for my throttle body flange that I cut out, I did actually already have the holes in it. Well, I went ahead and deleted those holes because I actually need a way to mount this throttle body to this flange. So I'm going to drill and tap the holes on this plate itself and then get it all welded together. Another one of the benefits of this machine is already revealing itself. After I cut out this throttle body plate here, I drilled these holes, I was tapping them, and my tap snapped off in one of the holes. Now, if you know anything about taps, you know that they are made of hardened steel, and attempting to get that back out of aluminum is basically a losing proposition. So I could have been frustrated about that situation until I realized, oh look, I'll just cut another one, who cares? That's exactly what I did. So I cut another one, drilled and tapped those holes, and it was fine. So it wasn't a waste of all of this effort I went through to make this, because if I'd have made this by hand, I guarantee you I would have been pretty frustrated about this happening. But as it is, doesn't really matter. Just cut out another one. Sure, you wasted a little bit of material. Don't have all the tools that I would like yet. One of those things that I would like to have is a press brake. Now, I'm not going to have one of the big fancy ones anytime soon. I am planning on getting the Swag off-road model that actually mounts to one of these 2010 presses, but I don't have that yet, and so I just have to make do for the time being. So what I've done is I've just welded together this quick little tool here. We're going to use that on the press to press these aluminum pieces to the correct angle that I want them to be, which on my digital angle finder here is at 152 degrees. So we'll just do a quick press on these, get them in the approximate shape that we want. We can move on to making the side pieces. Now I had to run and grab my safety glasses, as admittedly this is probably not the safest contraption right here to actually bend something. Seems to be working okay though. It's been a few hours since you saw that last clip when I was trying to bend the aluminum on the press there. And as I suspected, 1/4-inch aluminum is just too thick, it's too brittle, and doesn't like being bent in such a fashion. And I actually started to fracture the aluminum. So bending it was not going to work. I basically just had to cut all of the pieces out into individual pieces and weld them all together, which isn't really that bad. And so that's what I started doing. I cut out a variety of pieces here. This is kind of where we stand right now. And the welding all looks good. I'm happy with the welding. The problem is, I just don't like the piece overall. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way I've designed it. And if there's one thing I've learned in all this time of doing this, that if you don't like something, you're not gonna like it more if you just keep forging ahead and keep doing it the way you were originally intending on doing it. Because even if you finish that part and put it on your car, you're eventually going to see only that part when you look at that car, and it's gonna really annoy you. Let's go ahead and continue on with redesigning this aluminum piece here, and hopefully we can make something somewhat usable out of it. Now, it certainly can be frustrating to have to undo a bunch of work that you've already done, but I can guarantee you, if you just keep trying to scab it together to make it work, you're just going to become more and more frustrated. I've been there many times myself, so at this point, I'm trying to be smarter about it and recognize and say, hey, this isn't working, try something else. So let's get to cutting this thing off. All right, you guys, I have to apologize because I was a bad YouTuber there. I did not do a good job of documenting how the rest of this project went as far as having that throttle body adapter built. To be honest, the whole project just went completely off the rails. I was frustrated because it just wasn't coming out exactly the way I wanted it to. My shop was a disaster, which always frustrates me as well. So you kind of just have to go back to the beginning there. That's what I did. I redesigned how I wanted this thing done, and I'm actually pretty happy with how it came out. I'm still kind of on the fence about whether or not I'd like to remake it out of stainless steel, but I do think the aluminum kind of fits the aesthetic of what I was going for. Kind of matches the intake manifold. So you guys tell me down in the comments down below, what do you think of this throttle body adapter? Do you think I should remake it out of stainless steel? So as you can see, everything's in place now. I do have the throttle body mounted on there, and what's nice about this is we can finally move on to our next step of doing all the intercooler piping, which means, of course, mounting our intercooler. But before we can get to that, we need to address something else as far as the cooling system goes. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if you guys didn't see the previous video, I am building this car for a drag and drive event coming up later this year. Now, if you know anything about those kind of races, you know that keeping the engine cool is one of the most important aspects of it, because yes, you're racing on the track, but then you have to drive, and sometimes you end up getting stuck in traffic for a long period of time. So you want to have a cooling system that's going to stand up to what the car is going to endure. So the stock radiator in this thing just isn't going to work. It's a single row radiator, very thin, doesn't have a whole lot of volume. So I got this upgraded radiator. Now this is from a company called Engineered Cooling Products. I don't know anything about them really. It's certainly not sponsored. They didn't give this to me. I bought this. It just seemed like it had some good stuff in there. It's all aluminum radiator, and it's a dual core radiator. And they had some wording on the site that made it seem like a little bit special, like some of the other 2-core radiators kind of cheap out, whereas this one doesn't. So I have no idea. We're going to see how this thing performs. However, this is a stock style radiator in that everything will bolt up to it that the factory radiator does, and that's important for one primary reason. Now, because I installed this supercharger system on this engine, it really pushed out the front components quite a bit, especially the crankshaft pulley. And so the clearance between the cooling fans and the pulley is now non-existent. So I can't get the stock cooling fans on there anymore. Now, originally my idea was, well, I'm just gonna custom make an aluminum shroud and put some slimline fans on there. We'll be good to go. But I eventually came around to thinking two things about that. One, I really don't feel like making a custom shroud. It's kind of a lot of work for not much payoff. Two, I actually really like the stock cooling fans. I think they do a great job. So my alternative instead, especially because now I have a custom radiator that has a thicker core to it, that adds even more distance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the entire radiator, cooling fan, condenser assembly, all of it together, and I'm gonna push it towards the front of the car, maybe an inch, inch and a half, enough to gain clearance for that crank pulley. That way I can still use the stock cooling fans, I can still use my stock wiring on there, all the programming will be the same, I won't have to change any of that, and it'll be a much simpler design. That is if I can actually modify the adjustment on that radiator. I think I can. After everything else I've done, I'm pretty sure I can move a radiator, but we're gonna have to see how this all works out. The first thing we need to do is get this front fascia off of here so we can take a closer look at what we're working with. One other side benefit of getting my plasma table together is that it forced me to finally hook up my air system in my shop, so now I actually have some air tools to use in here. All right, front fascia is off. I'm gonna go ahead and remove our little support bar here as well. They got this thing really nicely held on with zip ties. We're gonna take these off, take this main bar off, and then we'll have good access to our radiator, condenser, and cooling fan assembly, and try to figure out how we can get that modified. Sometimes what I love about this automotive archaeology is what you actually find. I had to show you guys these incredible horns we have here. Look at these things. They got the red back on them. Woo! Yeah, those are all coming off immediately. That's atrocious. And my favorite part is the ultra professional install here, where it's zip tied into place. If one zip tie won't do, 4 will definitely do. Garbage. Now on these drag and drive events, you do have to have a functional horn. Now this one still does have the factory horn right here, so I'm just gonna test that thing, make sure it works okay. If it doesn't, I'll just replace the factory one. There was no need to have these ridiculous aftermarket ones on there that I'm sure sounded pretty terrible. So that's out of the way. We've got this off. Let's go ahead and get this crossbar off of here. Now this vehicle does have a rebuilt title on it, and throughout this whole time of owning this car, I've been trying to figure out why that is the case. I haven't been able to find any areas of the car that seem like they're so irrevocably damaged that it would total it out. Now obviously this is an older car. It wouldn't take much of an impact to actually total it. The front end stuff has been kind of loose and some random fasteners missing, so clearly the front end has been hit or parts taken off of it before. Now I think I found what might be the issue here, and it's this front frame horn. This actual piece right here that crossbar bolts to is beat up pretty good. Now I find it hard to believe that just this is what caused it to be totaled, because the frame rail itself is completely straight. I'm not seeing any sort of deformation in either of the frame rails in the front. It looks just fine. The only thing I can see is that this actual mounting point here is damaged. So I can pretty much straighten that with no issue at all. I'm actually really happy about this because I was expecting to find something maybe a bit worse that's actually wrong with it. But in any case, now we're down to having full access to our radiator assembly. I think this is actually going to be easier than I thought it was to actually move everything forward a little bit and actually get our new radiator in there with our original cooling fan. Very happy about that because that means it's going to be very much easier to mount our intercooler on here and start running our intercooler piping. So this is the kind of thing that frustrates me a little bit about working on cars. So if you notice here, this radiator mount here goes up flush against the core support right there. Now on this side, hey, wait a minute. Oh, that's right. They just put it on backwards. But instead of realizing that something was wrong, they just used a longer bolt in there to actually make it go. So this radiator was never actually quite square in this thing. Not that you ever would have noticed that, but I don't know. Stuff like that just factory condenser on these vehicles doubles as your automatic transmission cooler. You can see the transmission cooler lines here at the top, and then the condenser for the AC system is all this bottom area right here. Well, as you know, we got rid of all the other AC system on here. Originally, I wasn't going to modify this at all, but in truth, because I want to have a little bit more room for our intercooler, I'm just going to go ahead and cut this right here along this line so I still have my automatic trans cooler, but I get rid of the condenser portion because we don't need that anymore. Is it a kind of a waste of a part because it's still functional? Probably. Should I have just gotten a larger automatic transmission cooler for this vehicle? Also probably, but this is what we're going to do for right now. I think it'll be okay. Transmission cooler here, sans condenser. So this is all ready to go. Let's go ahead and get our radiator fully assembled with this on there and the cooling fan as well, so we can start mocking it up in the car. Well, we're off to a solid start here because this does not actually fit onto this radiator. Now, I will say that when I ordered this radiator, it didn't specifically say that it would fit the 05 Dodge Magnum. I think this might have been for like 09 and up Challenger. So we may run into some custom fitment issues here that we're gonna have to do. That's okay, not the end of the world. Okay, good news as far as getting the cooling fan module onto this radiator. I did have to do a minor modification here by the other radiator outlet. I had to kind of cut this little corner elbow off for it to fit underneath the outlet here and actually slide into the receiver. But other than that, it bolted right up. So like I said, this is probably not actually meant for an 05 Magnum, this radiator, but it does seem to work. All right, success. We got our transmission cooler up here mounted to our radiator. Just necessitated us having to drill some different holes in the mounting tabs here a little bit closer in to make that work. One weird thing here is that these bungs that are on the radiator have a fine thread pitch, which I'm not sure what goes on those vehicles. I think maybe, well, I'm not even gonna guess because I don't even know, but it was kind of strange. There was a fine thread pitch on these things. So it took me a minute to find a bolt that worked in there, but we're all mounted up. I wanna give you guys a little comparison shot here of the original radiator versus this one as far as the thickness goes. Here is the factory single row radiator. You can see our thickness there. Now look at our new fully aluminum radiator. So a dual radiator core there, and also with the aluminum end tanks on it. These plastic end tanks sometimes have a propensity to blow off, especially if you end up pressurizing your cooling system via losing a head gasket. You can blow those guys off and make a giant mess. So a little bit of added safety here with the aluminum radiator, and also you can see just how much more cooling capacity it has. All right, we've got our new radiator mocked into place here. Originally, my thought was that I was just going to actually modify this lower radiator support to actually make everything fit in here. But honestly, this factory piece is such a flim-flam piece. It's actually driving me nuts. I mean, literally, this thing is so thin. I mean, seriously, look at this thing. Are you kidding me right now? This is your lower radiator support on these cars. It's kind of ridiculous. So I've just decided to make a new one from scratch. It's gonna be a lot easier and cleaner that way, so I can immediately design it to my specifications. So we're just gonna make it out of some angle iron steel that I have lying around. Not gonna be the most beautiful thing you ever saw. It doesn't have to be, it just needs to be functional to put our radiator in the correct spot, and then we can move on to mounting our intercooler. Well, as is usually the case, I got a little bit carried away building this thing. It's definitely overbuilt, but I'm okay with that. It has a lot more rigidity than the factory piece did. And I think it's gonna provide a nice mounting location right here for me to come off, build off of this and actually build my intercooler mounts. So it's gonna be kind of a dual purpose deal. And as you can see from the side here, just how much it kicks it forward, I think it's gonna fit perfectly in there and move our radiator forward just enough. Let's go ahead and get this thing on the car and try it out. Extremely happy with how this mount turned out. Just kicks the radiator forward far enough. It'll have a little bit of backward tilt to it, not too bad. On the top here, super simple, just a couple of spacer blocks here to space it out. And as you can see, the clearance between the cooling fans and the pulleys is plenty good. Basically back to factory, so we're in good shape there. Really, really happy with how this project turned out. Unfortunately, that's as far as we're going to make it in this episode, but in the next episode, we get to install our intercooler and start working on our intercooler piping. This is a 4-inch intercooler core. Is it going to fit behind the bumper? I have no idea, but none of this stuff should have fit anyway, and we're making it all fit. So that's what's coming up next in the next episode. I hope you guys come back then. Until then, we'll see you next time on Reignited.